Imagine this: an empire that stood for centuries, ruled by an all-powerful czar, and then, in 1917, it's just gone. And in its place, something the world had never, ever seen before: the very first communist state. This wasn't just a local affair. This one event would go on to define the conflicts of the entire 20th century. So let's get into how it all happened. So how on earth did this happen? How can a single radical idea, something dreamed up by philosophers, actually bring down a nation of over 170 million people and reshape it from the ground up? That is the big question we're going to tackle today. And what's crazy is that this whole thing unfolded in less than a single year. You're actually looking at two revolutions here, not one. In February, the whole monarchy just collapses. But by October, a small, really disciplined group of radicals, the Bolsheviks, grabbed the wheel for themselves. Two massive, world-changing events in just 8 months. Incredible. To really get why Russia exploded, we've got to zoom out a bit first. Because at the time, Europe was buzzing with new and dangerous ideas. The old system of kings and nobles was being seriously challenged, and everyone had a different idea about how to run a country. You basically had 3 main teams in the game. You had the liberals, who wanted elected governments, but, usually only for guys with property. Then you had the conservatives, who were all about tradition and pumping the brakes on any big changes. And then there were the radicals. They wanted a government for the majority and were even pushing for wild ideas like, letting women vote. But while all of them were arguing, another idea was bubbling up. And this one was way, way more extreme than the others. This was socialism. And it wasn't just going to change the government, it was going to change, everything. At its heart, the socialist idea was pretty simple, but totally revolutionary. They believed private property was the root of all evil. As long as a few rich people owned all the factories and all the land, they would always put profits ahead of people. The solution? Simple. Let society, everyone, own everything together. And this is where Karl Marx comes into the picture. For him, this wasn't just some theory for a book. Nope, it was a call to arms. He saw all of history as a fight between the rich and the poor, the owners and the workers. And he said the only way out for the workers was a violent revolution to tear the whole system down. So you see, socialism wasn't just an idea, it was a plan. Okay, so now let's take all these explosive European ideas and drop them into Russia. Because while these ideas were spreading, Russia was different. It was a huge, deeply unequal empire run by an absolute monarch. It was basically the perfect pressure cooker for a revolution. Just look at this number, 85%. That's how many people in the Russian Empire were peasants, working the land. To put that in perspective, in places like France or Germany, it was less than half that. This created this huge, angry class of people who had very different problems than factory workers in the rest of Europe. And it wasn't just one problem. It was like a perfect storm of crises all hitting at once. You had the Tsar with total power. You had millions of peasants who wanted the land the nobles owned. The conditions in the factories were just awful. Then in 1905, you get Bloody Sunday, where the Tsar's own troops fired on peaceful protesters. And the final nail in the coffin? World War I. We're talking 7 million casualties and cities starving. The country was at a breaking point. So by 1917, that pressure cooker, it finally explodes. The whole system just breaks. But remember, it happens in 2 stages. First, the old government collapses, which just creates a giant power vacuum. And that sets the stage for a much more organized, much more radical group to step in and take over. The February Revolution was pure chaos. It started with women protesting bread shortages, and it just spiraled. Soldiers refused orders, they joined the protesters, and boom, the Tsar was out. But the new government made one huge mistake. They kept Russia in the war. So when the Bolshevik leader, Vladimir Lenin, shows up in April, his message was simple and powerful: peace, land, and bread. By October, his party was ready to take what the government couldn't manage to hold. Now, unlike the spontaneous mess in February, the October Revolution was planned like a military operation. Lenin convinced his party it was now or never. They set up a committee, and with incredible precision, on the night of October 24th, they didn't just march, they took over the city's key points. The post office, train stations, they arrested the government ministers. It was a classic, perfectly executed coup. So, the Bolsheviks have the power. Now what? Well, their goal was absolutely massive. Build the world's very first socialist society on the ruins of an old empire. And that meant huge, immediate changes, which, of course, led to a brutal and bloody fight. And they did not waste a second. The changes came hard and fast. All the big industries and banks, now owned by the state. The land, seized from the rich and handed over to the peasants. All those fancy aristocratic titles, gone. The Bolsheviks, now calling themselves the Communist Party, made Russia a one-party state. They created a secret police, the Cheka, to crush anyone who disagreed. And, super importantly, they got Russia out of World War I. Now you can imagine, not everyone was thrilled about this. A horrible civil war erupted almost immediately. On one side, you had the Bolsheviks, the Reds, fighting for their new world. And against them, you had the Whites, which was basically everyone else. Monarchists, liberals, other socialists, all united by their hatred of the Bolsheviks. And it got even messier. The Greens were peasant armies just fighting for themselves. And the rest of the world? Countries like Britain, France, and the US were terrified this revolution would spread, so they actually sent troops to help the Whites. The Reds ended up winning the war, but their leader, Lenin, died not long after. And the man who clawed his way to the top of the power struggle was Joseph Stalin. He had a vision to take the Soviet Union from a nation of farmers to an industrial giant, and to do it at terrifying speed. His method? The 5-year plans. And if you just look at the numbers, the results were stunning. In the first 5-year plan alone, oil, coal, and steel production all doubled. They built entire new industrial cities from scratch. It really looked like the socialist experiment was working. But, and this is a huge but, this progress came at a horrifying human cost. To make it all happen, Stalin forced millions of peasants off their land and onto massive state-run farms. This brutal policy was called collectivization. Any peasant who fought back was branded a kulak, a rich peasant, and was either arrested, deported, or just shot. It's one thing to hear the policy, but listen to this actual letter from a peasant back then. He's talking about how the state just systematically took and sold everything he owned, his buildings, his home, everything. The result of all this chaos and resistance, plus some terrible harvests, was one of the worst famines in human history. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 4 million people starved to death. That was the price of those new factories. So, let's pull back one last time and look at the big picture. Because the Russian Revolution wasn't just about Russia. Its shockwaves hit every corner of the globe and completely redrew the political map for the rest of the century. For the first time, socialism wasn't just an idea in a book. It was a real place, a superpower, the USSR. And this inspired people everywhere. Communist parties popped up from Britain to India. Anti-colonial movements in Africa and Asia saw the Soviet Union as a powerful new friend against the old European empires. A whole new force had entered the world stage. And that leaves us with the revolution's really complicated and haunting legacy. It was all started with these noble ideas, right? Equality, justice, a better world for the working person. But what it created in practice was civil war, famine, secret police, and total control. And it forces us to ask a really tough question. Is it even possible to build a perfect world without using brutal, repressive means to get there?